Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Adoptions from the Heart TV. I'm your host, Amanda Aliberti. Today we welcome Chris, who's a supervisor out of our New Jersey office of Adoptions from the Heart. He's going to talk a little bit about the role he plays at the agency and how he helps provide supportive services to adoptive parents. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Can you start by sharing with our audience the role that you play at the agency?
Certainly. So I'm a district supervisor. I oversee all the day-to-day operations for our New Jersey office, and I'm also the regional manager over our Wynwood office in Pennsylvania.
Talk to us a little bit about the preparation that goes into an adoptive family from the time they apply to when they go into the waiting family profile books and kind of the supportive services that you provide.
So, we first meet with adoptive parent applicants individually to get to know them a little bit better. They get to know the agency a little bit better and how we do things here at Adoptions from the Heart. Then they move on to their education courses. They learn about what adoption is and what it isn't. They learn a lot about the expecting and birth parents that consider adoption and ultimately place their children for adoption, if that's what they choose to do. We also do courses on transracial adoption, what it's like if you're an adoptive parent and you're adopting a child who's of a different race, to really prepare them and educate them for those really unique challenges that come with transracial adoption. We've also been providing a course on intersectionality, really looking at all the different identities that can compose the folks that are in the adoption triad, both the expecting and birth parents, the adoptive parents, and as well as the child, and how those identities intersect and what some of the systems of oppression and advantages might be to those identities. So we really do a lot to try to prepare our adoptive families for this journey. Then we move on to the home study evaluation process. And I always say that's a bit of a misnomer because it sounds like we're just studying your home, but it's so much more than that. It's really a comprehensive assessment of adoptive parent applicants and the regulations that they need to meet for their particular state, and to make sure that they're ready to take a child and to parent that child. So it takes a while, it's a good, 8, sometimes 12 months process to go through all those education courses. The last step in the process is we really prepare them to go on the active waiting list, to go in, as we like to call it, the profile books. How to prepare your profile book itself with the photographs and the description of you as an adoptive parent, how to get ready to shoot your video that expecting and birth parents look at, and then to complete our profile key form, which is the form they get some choices over with the circumstances and situation of adoption. So it's quite a comprehensive process.
So it's not like you just walk in the door and you get a baby.
Yeah, you don't just fill out a few forms and show us a copy of your driver's license, right? It's both, I think, preparation, education, but also an assessment. Sure. And we want to make sure that the adoptive family is ready to do this and wants to do this, and we want to feel assured that they're prepared and able to do it.
Sure. So I think people who are not as familiar with the adoption process and what people go through when they're coming to the agency don't really get that, right? So the idea is, the goal is obviously to build your family and be placed with a child. But I think that one of the things we try to do as social workers, as counselors, is set expectations from the beginning, specifically for adoptive families. Can you talk a little bit about that piece and what has worked for you over the years in trying to set realistic expectations for families who are just ready to go and want to be placed?
Yeah, I think you hit on the key phrase there. I think you have to go into this with realistic expectations. I think there's so many unknowns in adoption, and that's the big part that's often a struggle for adoptive families. I think the biggest unknown is when. When is this going to happen? Once you've gone through this preparation process and you've been approved and you're on the active waiting list, I think it can be really difficult to never know when this is going to happen. So I think going in with those realistic expectations that it is a waiting game, and the waiting game is the hardest part, I think. But I think there's a lot of things that adoptive parents can do during that period of time. I certainly think staying engaged with the agency is really very important. Staying connected to your adoption social worker, having frequent communication is helpful. I think taking advantage of all the resources we have here at Adoptions from the Heart. We do continuing education, we do education seminars, We have waiting family support groups. I mean, I think all of those things can help adoptive families stay connected and feel a part of the agency, as they go through that waiting process in that period.
I think too, as adults, we're very used to when you put effort into something, you get something back. And sometimes a trigger word in our world of adoption can be control. Can you speak on that and how we try to just change people's perspectives on control when they're coming into the process, and how to be prepared once they do begin that waiting period and things that they may not have had control over that they thought they would have?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of a lack of control for adoptive families as they go through this process and go through the waiting period. I think that's difficult for some people to manage, some more than others. So I think it's really important for adoptive parents to be very self-aware, the kind of person that they are, and how they're going to regulate their emotions during that wait. It can certainly be frustrating. It can be depressing. It can be anxiety provoking. And all those things are natural and understandable emotions to have. I think it's how you manage those emotions that are very much a big key to being successful in managing your wait when that happens. I think having a lot of empathy and understanding for the expecting and birth parents and what they're going through can really help people put this all into perspective. But there are some things that are in your control. And certainly with adoptive parents, the pictures and the descriptions that you put in your profile book go a long way to showing who you are as prospective adoptive parents. I certainly think the videos that the adoptive families make, also shows in both video form and you speaking who you are. And then certainly the choices that you put on your profile key. And we always say to adoptive parents, we want you to carefully consider those choices on the key. We want you to be comfortable with your choices, but certainly the more open you are, the more likely that your profile is going to be shown more frequently, and there's a chance that you may be selected in a shorter amount of time. But I think being aware of what issues are in your control and how you can do to manage those things are really important.
What would you say is your biggest piece of advice to a waiting prospective adoptive family, and what could they be doing that really could help them when they hit that 1-year mark or that 2-year mark?
I think, again, going back to having realistic expectations is important. I think it's also important to live your life. That, if you sit by your phone waiting for it to ring every minute of every day, that's kind of a difficult way to go through the waiting period. So I think as much as you can remain engaged in your job, if you're working, if you're part of a couple, enjoy the time you have with your spouse. If you're going to be a first-time parent as an adoptive parent, really enjoy that time. Life changes quite dramatically when you have a child. And I know a lot of our families, whether they're a single parent, a same-sex couple, or a straight couple, or whether you're expanding your family through adoption, but everybody's story is different and unique. But I think enjoying the time you have as your life exists right now is really important, and not just focusing so much on the future and when it's going to happen. And we always say here, it's not a matter of if, it's when. If you stay in our agency and you stay with our program, you will eventually be placed with a child. We just don't know when that's going to happen. So really focusing on taking care of yourself. I think self-care is very important. I also think that just enjoying your life and living your life, and that includes taking vacations and continuing your interest in your hobbies until the point where you get the call and it's time to be placed.
So talk to us about the role you play as a supervisor, because I'm sure there are moments where you are taking phone calls from families who are really angry and really frustrated and just at that they've hit a wall, right? What is your response to them? What helps you as a supervisor, as a social worker, kind of counseling those clients who are just facing a lot of hardship?
Yeah, I think we very much look at ourselves as a team. And even though I oversee and supervise the social workers and have some administrative functions, I certainly do a lot of team meetings with the social workers and the adoptive families when they've had that kind of a situation, when they're frustrated with their wait, perhaps if they've experienced a disappointment or disruption, how difficult that can be. So I think we very much take a team approach. We talk about it, we meet in person, we have phone calls, we set up video conferences just to process it and talk about it and to see what kind of support. We have, adoptive families that have gone through those experiences, that have waited for a long time for placement and then were eventually placed, that are willing to be a resource for our current waiting families. Or we've had adoptive families that have gone through a disappointment or a disruption and ultimately, got placed and then are willing to talk about that experience and what they've learned from it and how they dealt with and managed it. So I think that's really the key. We really like to have that team approach. We like to bring a lot of support and really try to assist our families in practical ways, but just with that emotional support, I think is also very key.
Yeah. I've actually witnessed, Chris, on many occasions interacting with clients, because I respect the way you approach it. You listen. And I listen to that. You take a moment to really hear that person and find out what is going on in your head. Help me better understand why you feel the way that you feel. And I find that has led to situations of success, because you really do hear the person. It's not just you teaching them, it's you listening and trying to figure out a way that you can approach the situation to make it better for them. And you take a lot of what is taught in educational classes all the way through up until those moments where a family maybe is waiting 2 years and struggling. And a lot of what you focus on is similar content to what you taught in the beginning, right?
Yeah, and I think, we have to recognize that adoption is a very emotional experience. And it's understandable that people are going to feel very emotional. I think starting where people are is really important. As you said, listening, validating their feelings and where they are in the moment. People aren't necessarily looking for us to immediately solve their problem. And as we know, it's going to happen when it's going to happen. And I know that sounds like a cliche, and it is, but I think it's true, that it's going to happen when it's going to happen, and when it's right, and when the match is the match, the match is the match, and all of those things apply. But I think really trying to reiterate everything that we did go over and learn in our adoption education courses, I think sometimes is really helpful to reinforce.
Sure.
But I think that's our approach, is to be as understanding and as supportive as possible. And by listening, I think that's a big part of it. Sure.
I'll never forget, this was a few years ago, I placed a baby with a woman who had been waiting a little over 4 years. And 4 years is definitely, in the spectrum of wait, very long in the adoption world. And I remember asking her, how do you feel at this moment? How does the last 4 years feel to you? And she said, that all went out the window. And this was meant to be. And she was so happy and grateful for this space of her life. And I think that all the education, the support, the team effort that you talk about is really significant to that moment.
Yeah, and I think when you're in the moment, when you're waiting and you still haven't been placed with a child, you can't envision and imagine that day. But you're right, for adoptive families then have gotten to that point where they have been placed, that's exactly their response, is that all of that kind of washed away, and I really didn't think about it anymore. But we understand you're not there yet, and that it's still difficult when you're waiting.
Well, we appreciate you. I think that the adoption process definitely is encompassing, and it's good to have a team supporting you through that. And I think that's what we try to do here at Adoptions from the Heart, is come full circle and provide those supportive services before, during, and after. We appreciate our staff, such as Chris, who really does create that atmosphere for people to feel comfortable, to feel validated, to feel heard. And ultimately, we do try to help provide supportive services to all of our clients. So thank you very much. Thank you to our audience, and continue to tune in to AFTHtv.